We are all made of stardust, and our stories are the light that shines through the endless dark of space. Join us for a cosmic journey through the human experience and the magic of existence. Subscribe now and stay connected to the light within us all.
My ex-wife didn't waste a single week grieving our 32-year marriage. 6 months after I signed the divorce papers, she was engaged to a man who drove a Porsche, owned half a dozen luxury developments across Tennessee, and had his photo on billboards from Nashville to Brentwood. She had the wedding of her dreams, rooftop venue downtown, 200 guests, champagne at every table. My son stood beside the groom as best man, gave a toast about new beginnings and real success. My daughter watched from a corner table and couldn't eat a bite. I wasn't there. I was sitting on a terrace in Porto, Portugal, drinking espresso and watching the Douro River catch the morning light. 3 weeks after the wedding, someone walked into that same reception hall, a private investor dinner for my ex-wife's new husband, and asked 4 questions in front of 70 people that burned the whole thing to the ground. Within 48 hours, every local news station in Nashville was running the story. My son called me from his car, voice shaking, asking me if I had known. I told him the truth. I told him I had tried to warn him. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "Dad, I owe you more than an apology. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually started." In a hospital room in Brentwood, Tennessee, staring at ceiling tiles and listening to my own heartbeat on a monitor that didn't care whether I lived or disappeared. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 62 years old. I spent 34 years building a structural engineering firm from a drafting table in my garage into a company with 91 employees and contracts across the Southeast. I sold it in 2021 for $6.4 million. I paid my taxes, split fairly with my partners, and quietly became the kind of man who no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. My ex-wife had other ideas about that. We met in graduate school. She was sharp, funny, the most organized person I had ever known. She could plan an event the way I designed a bridge. Nothing left to chance, every detail serving a purpose. When we were young, that quality felt like partnership. By year 20, it felt like living inside someone else's blueprint. I was a load-bearing element. Functional, necessary, invisible, she built a successful event planning business in Nashville's upper tier. Corporate galas, charity fundraisers, society weddings. She was good at it, genuinely gifted. But somewhere along the way, the performance required for her clients started bleeding into everything else. Our home had to look a certain way for a certain crowd. My truck embarrassed her at her clients' parties. I drove a Ford F-150 because I liked it, and she told people it was the contractor's truck. At dinner parties, she redirected conversations away from me with a practiced elegance that left no marks. You'd feel diminished before you understood what had happened. By year 28, I had my own bathroom, my own schedule, and the quiet understanding that she was tolerating my presence until something better presented itself. We had 2 kids. My daughter is 29. She's a pediatric nurse in Knoxville, steady and clear-eyed in the way that comes from watching people in real pain. She saw her mother clearly for years and never made peace with what she saw. My son is 26, works in commercial real estate analysis in Nashville. Smart and ambitious, and spent most of his life believing his mother's version of our family, that I was distant, emotionally withholding, too absorbed in work to be present. All her words, all in his mouth. The stroke happened on a Tuesday morning in March. I was at my desk reviewing a land survey when my left hand stopped cooperating. Mild, the neurologist said later. Transient ischemic attack, technically. A warning, not a catastrophe. I drove myself to Vanderbilt Medical Center. My ex-wife was hosting a venue walkthrough for a senator's retirement party and could not reschedule. The attending physician was a quiet man in his 50s who looked at my chart, looked at me, then set the clipboard down. He said, "Mr. Mercer, your body just sent you a certified letter." I'd read it carefully. My daughter flew in from Knoxville and sat beside my bed for 2 days. My son called once, asked if I was serious or being dramatic. I heard my ex-wife in the background, and I understood then that I was not imagining things. Lying in that hospital bed, I did the math I had been avoiding for years. I was 61 years old. I had sold my company, built something real, survived something that could have killed me. And the only honest thought I could produce was this. If I died tomorrow, I would die as a prop in someone else's carefully designed life. My daughter held my hand on the second morning and said, "Dad, you know you don't have to go back to that house." I knew. The discharge process took an hour. Walking out into the March afternoon, I felt my heart beat in a way I hadn't noticed in years. Steady, deliberate, mine. I sat in my truck in the parking garage for 15 minutes and made a decision the way I'd always made the important ones, quietly, without ceremony, and with full intention of following through. It took me 4 months. The engineering sale had left me $4.1 million after taxes and the partnership distributions. I'd already moved the majority into managed accounts before the stroke. I set up an irrevocable trust. My daughter listed as trustee, a separate account in her name alone, $1.8 million. My ex-wife's attorneys would find nothing attached to it. The house in Brentwood was worth $2.4 million, mortgage-free. I refinanced it, pulled out $850,000, left her the property and the note that came with it. She had signed whatever I put in front of her for 32 years, because money was my department. That habit didn't change, even at the end. Portugal's residency visa required passive income documentation. I qualified easily. I found an apartment in Porto's Ribeira district. Riverview, stone floors, €1,200 monthly. I arranged international banking, health coverage, and a Portuguese language tutor who turned out to be a 70-year-old retired school teacher named Henrique, who charged €15 an hour and corrected my pronunciation with the patience of a man who had seen everything. I told my daughter at her kitchen table in Knoxville in June. Laid it all out, the trust, the timeline, the apartment, the date. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she looked at her coffee cup for a moment. "The stroke scared me more than it scared you," she said. "Go. Please, just go." I didn't tell my son. He was still living inside his mother's version of our family. Some people need to find the door themselves. Divorce papers were filed through my attorney in Nashville. My ex-wife would be served after I crossed the Atlantic. I left them on the kitchen counter on a Thursday morning in July, under the keys to the house. The note I left read, "The mortgage is current. The house is yours. Take care of yourself." The car service came at 5:15. I carried 2 suitcases. 32 years fit into 2 bags when you stop counting things that were never really yours. My daughter texted as I cleared security, "Text when you land. I love you." I landed in Lisbon, took the train north to Porto, and walked into an apartment that smelled like old stone and river air. I set my bags down. I stood at the window and watched the Douro move past below in the late afternoon light, unhurried and indifferent to everything I had left behind. My chest didn't hurt. 4 months later, the news arrived the way these things always do, through someone I hadn't thought about in years. An old colleague from my engineering days, a man I'd worked with on a highway project in Memphis in 2008, sent me a message on LinkedIn. He'd seen the announcement. My ex-wife was engaged to Craig Hollister, developer, Nashville and surrounding counties, known for luxury residential communities in the Franklin and Brentwood areas. The engagement announcement was on Instagram, crystal glasses, hill country backdrop, 40,000 likes. I read the message twice, poured a glass of port, felt nothing particularly strong, the way you feel when you hear news about a city you used to live in. I typed back, "Thanks for the heads up. I'm doing well. Really well." Then, because 34 years of reading project proposals had made curiosity reflexive, I opened a browser. Craig Hollister's public profile was everything the algorithm rewarded. 63,000 Instagram followers, 4 active residential developments across Williamson County, a nonprofit sponsorship, photos of ribbon cuttings, charity golf tournaments, campaign-style signage reading Hollister Communities, Building Tennessee's Future. He was running for Brentwood City Council in November. I pulled up the Tennessee Secretary of State Business Registry, standard procedure, same as checking soil reports before a foundation pour. Hollister Development Group, LLC, incorporated 2019. 4 subsidiary LLCs attached, 1 per development. Revenue claims in investor materials averaging $18 million annually across the portfolio. Then the county filings, mechanics liens from 3 separate subcontractors, 2 framing crews and an electrician, combined unpaid invoices totaling $212,000. A UCC filing showing a maxed commercial credit line at one lender, $3.2 million. A second line at a regional bank, $2.1 million, also maxed. Equipment financing fully extended. Supplier payment disputes on record with the Better Business Bureau, 9 complaints in 14 months. I leaned back from my laptop. Enrique was due in an hour for our Tuesday lesson. Outside, Dodoro caught afternoon sun on the water. Then I pulled the civil court records. A former investment partner named Raymond Park had filed suit in February. Park alleged he had invested $900,000 in the first Hollister development in 2020, was promised 22% returns within 30 months, and had been paid back $200,000, not from profits, but from funds raised from later investors. The complaint used the phrase Ponzi-style structure in the second paragraph. The trial date was scheduled for early October, 8 weeks away. I sat with that for a moment. My ex-wife was planning a September wedding. My son was, by all appearances on social media, enthusiastically endorsing the man. He had posted a photo at Craig's campaign kickoff event with the caption, "Proud to support a man who actually builds things that last." Nashville needs more of this. I called my daughter that evening. She already knew. She had been digging for 2 weeks on her own, running his corporate structure through financial analysis tools she used at work. She said his reported revenue didn't match the construction draws on record. She estimated his actual operating margin at somewhere between 40 and 50% of what he was representing to investors. How many investors? I asked. I found documentation on at least 22. Friends, family, some neighbors. Average investment around $60,000. Total pool somewhere north of $1.3 million. Families who had probably trusted a man they'd met at a church fundraiser or a school auction. People who wrote checks because he had a nice smile and a campaign sign. "There's something else," my daughter said. Her voice changed slightly. "Your son isn't just a guest. Craig asked him to give the opening remarks at an investor appreciation dinner next month. 40 investors in the room. Your son is about to publicly vouch for this man in front of the people Craig defrauded." I gripped the balcony railing. The river below was moving in the dark, indifferent. I had tried once. 3 weeks after the engagement announcement, I called my son directly. He answered cautiously, surprised. I told him I looked at Hollister's filings, that the numbers didn't align, that he should verify before he attached his name publicly. He went quiet. Then he said, "Dad, you left. You don't get to have opinions about who Mom chooses now." He said Craig was successful, self-made, everything I apparently was not willing to be. He said I sounded bitter and small. He wasn't ready to hear it. I understood that. I had no intention of forcing it, but 22 families losing their savings was a different matter entirely. I went through my contacts, found a name I hadn't called in 9 years. Margaret Okafor, retired federal prosecutor, currently operating a private consulting firm in Atlanta focused on financial fraud awareness. I had met her at an engineering association board meeting in 2015. We had sat next to each other at a dinner and talked for 3 hours about pattern recognition. She in fraud investigations, me in structural failures. She had said at the end of the evening that people who build things and people who catch fraud use the same skill. You look for what's missing, not just what's there. I called her on a Wednesday morning Porto time. She answered on the second ring. I explained what I had found, sent her the filings, the civil complaint, the investor documentation my daughter had pulled together. She was quiet for a moment. "This isn't thin," she said finally. "This is a pattern I've seen move from civil to federal territory inside of 6 months." I told her about the investor appreciation dinner. I told her my son was scheduled to speak. I did not ask her to destroy anyone. I asked her whether the investors in that room deserved to hear the truth before another check was written. She said, "Give me a week." Margaret called back on a Friday. She had a contact, a man named Theodore Walsh, 71, retired circuit court judge out of Nashville, now doing financial literacy lectures at Vanderbilt Law. Silver-haired, unhurried, with the kind of presence that makes rooms go quiet before he speaks. He had reviewed the filings independently and agreed there was a public interest case for raising questions. The investor appreciation dinner was being held at a private event space in downtown Nashville. 40 investors, formal dinner, open remarks period following dessert. My son would speak first. Craig had positioned the evening as a celebration of the developments, a preview of the city council campaign, a moment of shared success. Margaret arranged for Theodore to attend as a guest of a financial advisor who was already on the list, someone whose clients had money in Hollister projects. The advisor wanted questions asked. Theodore was simply the right person to ask him. I sent my son a second message 3 days before the dinner. Short, I know you're speaking Thursday night. I'm asking one more time, look at the UCC filings. Look at Raymond Park's lawsuit. Look at the subcontractor liens. This isn't bitterness. This is the same thing I'd tell you if you brought me a land survey with these numbers. Verify the foundation before you put your name on it. He read it. He didn't respond. The dinner was Thursday evening Nashville time. 9 hours behind Porto. I was awake. My daughter texted updates from outside the venue. A friend of hers knew one of the servers and was passing along information. 8:47 p.m. Your son just finished his remarks. He called Craig, the most honest developer operating in Middle Tennessee today. Standing ovation from the investors. 9:03 p.m. Theodore Walsh has been introduced as a guest speaker. Looks like someone's grandfather. Room is relaxed. 9:11 p.m. Dad. He's doing it. I poured a glass of water and stood at the window. My daughter called at 9:32, whispering from a parking lot outside the venue. She said Theodore Walsh had stood up with the calm of a man who had presided over courtrooms for 26 years and addressed the room the way a physician delivers a diagnosis. Directly, without cruelty, but without softening the weight of the information. He had said he wanted to offer the investors a perspective on due diligence, since the evening was about shared investment in the community. He said he had reviewed Mr. Hollister's public filings as part of his own financial literacy work and found some details he believed the room deserved to understand. He noted the mechanics' liens filed by 3 subcontractors, the maxed credit lines at 2 lenders, the pending civil lawsuit from Raymond Park, alleging that early investor returns had been funded not from profits, but from later investor capital. He paused there and let the room do the math. He said he believed in giving people the information they needed to make decisions. He said he had no personal grievance with Mr. Hollister. He said he hoped the investors in the room would consult independent counsel before making any additional commitments. Then he raised his glass and said, "To accountability. May the foundations always match the renderings." My daughter said the room went completely silent for 4 seconds. Then phones came out. 40 people typing Craig Hollister lawsuit into search bars simultaneously. Craig had stood up to respond, and his voice had broken twice. My son had gone pale. My ex-wife had gripped the table and stared at nothing. The event had ended 20 minutes early. At 10:18 p.m. Nashville time, my ex-wife called me. I let it ring twice. Then I answered. She did not begin with a greeting. She began with my name, and then a single sentence that contained approximately 4 accusations and 2 obscenities. And then she said I had arranged this, that I had sent someone, that I had decided to destroy her life from 4,000 miles away because I was incapable of letting her be happy. As her finish. When she stopped, I said, "I'm sitting in Porto. It's almost 7 in the morning. I haven't been to Nashville in 4 months. Whatever happened tonight in that room happened because someone read the same public records that are available to anyone with internet access. If the information was damaging, that's a question about the information, not about who read it." She said something else. I won't repeat it. I said, "Take care of yourself." She hung up. I made coffee. Watched the Darrow carry the early light east toward the sea. My chest was steady, calm, the same as it had been every morning for 4 months in this apartment that had nothing in it that belonged to someone else's idea of my life. My son called at noon, Porto time, the following day. His voice was different from every phone call we had shared in the previous 3 years. The performance was gone. The careful flatness he used with me. The slight formality that said, "You're the person my mother described, and I am being fair but distant." That was gone. What was left was just his voice, tired and young and real. "Dad, I'm here." They're calling it fraud. The news ran it this morning. Craig's attorney released a statement, but the investors are already organizing. Raymond Park's attorney sent a press release. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit? They're looking at it. I know. I said those things at the dinner, in front of the investors, in front of cameras. I called him the most honest developer in Middle Tennessee. He stopped. My firm put me on a review hold this morning. They need to understand the nature of my relationship with Craig before I can work any active accounts. Dad, I'm in those photos. I made a public endorsement. I know, son. You called me twice. You sent me the filings. I told you sounded bitter. I told you sounded bitter. I told you. He stopped again. I said things about you to Craig. I repeated things Mom had said about you, about why you left, about what kind of man you were. I said them like they were facts. I sat down on the terrace. You were working with the information you had, I said. That's not an excuse. No, but it's the truth. He was quiet for a while. Then he asked me how I was. Genuinely not as a formality, the way you ask someone after a long absence when you've started to understand what the absence cost. I told him honestly. I was well, better than I had been in 20 years. I slept without difficulty. My blood pressure had normalized. I had started cooking. Genuinely cooking, not heating things up, but actually learning technique from a neighbor in the building named Rosaria, who had been making bacalhau the same way since 1987 and considered shortcuts a personal affront. He laughed at that. A real laugh surprised out of him. We talked for an hour and 40 minutes. He asked about Portugal, about what I did in the mornings, about whether I was lonely. I told him I was not lonely, that I had discovered a meaningful difference between solitude and isolation, and that I had spent 30 years in the second one without knowing the name for it, and now I lived in the first one voluntarily, and it felt like breathing correctly after decades of shallow air. He was quiet after that. Then he said, I spent my whole life watching Mom, learning how to read the room and adjust myself to it. I thought that was sophistication. I thought Dad was just rigid. I didn't understand that you weren't rigid. You just stopped adjusting. I didn't say anything for a moment. You understand now, I said finally. That's what matters. Before we hung up, he asked if he could visit. Not immediately, not until the firm review resolved, not until he had some footing under him again. But sometime, in the fall. I said the door was always open. 18 months passed. I am writing this from the same terrace where I took that phone call, watching the same river move to the same morning light. Craig Hollister was indicted by a federal grand jury in January, 11 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of securities fraud. His trial lasted 3 weeks in April. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. Guilty on all counts. He was sentenced in July to 9 years in federal prison. His assets were frozen pending restitution proceedings. The 4 residential developments were placed in receivership. Investors recovered somewhere between 22 and 38 cents on the dollar, depending on the project. The city council campaign ended, as you might imagine, before it started. My ex-wife was sued by the investor group in February for the recovery of a vehicle Craig had purchased for her, a $64,000 SUV bought from investor funds 4 months before the wedding, a fact established by the forensic accounting. She settled for $31,000. The Brookwood house went into default in March, when she could no longer manage the mortgage I'd left attached to it. She sold it in May, cleared the debt, and walked away with approximately $200,000 after fees in the settlement. Her event planning clients did not disappear entirely, but 3 corporate accounts paused or ended relationships following the news coverage. Her business is smaller now. She is managing. I do not feel satisfaction at that. I feel something closer to neutrality, the genuine kind, not the performed kind I spent years pretending was peace. My son went through the firm review and was cleared of knowing involvement. His reputation took damage he is still working to repair. He started working with a therapist in January, a man who specializes in family systems and the particular shape that family roles leave on adult behavior. He calls me every Sunday now. We talk about real things. He visited Porto in October. We spent 5 days together. We walked along the river, ate dinner at a place Enrique recommended, drank wine on the terrace in the evenings, and talked about his childhood from both sides for the first time. He told me things about what it felt like to be the son who defended his mother, the weight of that loyalty. The strange grief of discovering the story you'd built your identity on was incomplete. I told him about the years before he could have known, the quiet erosions, the things that don't leave marks you can point to. On the 4th night he said, I should have believed you. Not because you were right about Craig. I mean, yes, but that wasn't the important part. I should have believed that you were worth believing. I told him it was enough that he believed it now. He flew home on a Sunday morning. I walked back from the airport to Henrique's favorite cafe, ordered a coffee, and sat with the city waking up around me. My daughter as well. She received a department recognition at her hospital in November. She calls twice a week. We are solid in the way that relationships become solid when they've been tested and found to hold. As for me, my blood pressure runs at 112/68. I sleep 8 hours every night without aid. I lost 22 pounds without intending to, just from eating food that I made myself and walking through a city that asks nothing of me. My portfolio has grown to just over 1 million, generating 63,000 a year. My monthly expenses run 4,000. The math is comfortable. I paint on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, badly but with increasing competence. Henrique says my spoken Portuguese now contains only 3 kinds of errors, down from 7. Rosaria has declared my bacalhau acceptable, which from her is the highest available compliment. I have no romantic relationship. I am not looking for one. I am not lonely. There is a difference between a life that contains no partner and a life that contains no peace, and I spent 32 years confusing the two. People sometimes ask whether I regret how it ended, not the divorce. They mean the dinner. Theodore Walsh. The questions in that room. The chain of events that followed. I think about Raymond Park, who lost $900,000. I think about the 22 families who wrote checks to a man with a campaign sign and a Porsche. I think about the subcontractors who weren't getting paid. I think about my son standing at that microphone calling a fraud the most honest man in Middle Tennessee, building a reputation on a foundation that was already collapsing. I did not create Craig Hollister's choices. I did not manufacture the liens or the lawsuit or the investor accounts. I asked an honest man to ask honest questions in a room full of people who had stopped asking them. Truth doesn't need to be arranged. It only needs to be allowed to speak. That's the thing about foundations. You cannot build a life on what looks solid from a distance. You have to check the core. You have to ask what's holding it up, what the actual load-bearing elements are, whether the numbers behind the rendering match the rendering itself. I spent 34 years building structures that carried real weight. I know what failure looks like before it becomes catastrophic. I know the difference between a crack that's cosmetic and a crack that's structural. My marriage was structural. My ex-wife's second marriage was structural. My ex-wife's second marriage was structural. My son's belief in his mother's version of reality, that was structural too. All of it needed to come down before anything true could be built in its place. I did not come to Portugal to escape. I came to remember what it felt like to stand on solid ground. Everything else followed from that. The river is moving outside. It has been moving since before this city existed, and it will move long after all of us are finished with whatever we are trying to prove. There is something restful about that. Something that makes the need for performance feel very small and very far away. I chose myself when everything said I shouldn't. I chose truth when silence would have been simpler. And now I am here, healthy, free, watching the light change on water that does not care who I used to be. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it is not too late to choose the ground you stand on. Subscribe for more stories like this one, the kind that take a long time to live and a long time to earn. I'll see you in the next one.